So what do you see as far as the progress that some of these payers are making right now? And what do you expect over the next 6 months as these impacted payers are scrambling to conform to these new requirements?
Yeah, I mean, scrambling is the right word, essentially. So it's important, I think, to just kind of recognize what they have to go through to be able to make this successful by the deadline. You're essentially asking payers to take all of the different rules and reasons for why prior authorization may be necessary for certain, procedures. Again, the scope here right now is anything that's not a medication or drug. So they're having to gather all this information, which is probably dispersed among Word documents, spreadsheets, operating manuals. I'm sure there's somebody with like a Post-it note somewhere that says like, if it's Friday the 13th and, the sky is gray, overcast, then prior authorization is required. I'm making that up, of course. But the point is that there's a lot of this like, tribal knowledge. There's a lot of dispersed data and processes and rules at the payer level for this different, for these different prior authorization requirements. Getting that into a digitized and machine readable, format that some sort of external application, whether that's a third-party app, whether that's an EHR, something else, can actually consume and understand to be able to know, is prior authorization required or not, and then what documentation is needed to be able to satisfy the request when it is required. That's extensive. That's like trying to put all the different rules and details on how to drive a car together. We see the challenges with self-driving cars. That's because it's really hard. There's so many nuances, so many different pieces of data and factors that we weigh as human beings as we drive, that you're trying to turn into something that a machine can understand and turn into, computer code. So we see them continuing to push hard to try and get that information into a digitized format. Now, there were very limited options for exceptions or delays on the implementation of these APIs. Basically, at the end of the day, the like Medicaid and CHIP programs that maybe sort of under resourced or need a little bit more time, I believe they can ask for an extra year to be able to comply. But overall, there's quite a few organizations here that have to be able to meet that January 1st, 2027 deadline. So there's not a lot of time left to be able to get this stuff accomplished. And then on the EHR side, if I can hit on that real quick, Sam, you talked about Epic coming out with this stuff, but all of these, certified EHRs are going to need to provide this type of functionality if they want to meet the requirements, and if they want their, provider customers to be able to attribute and attest to the fact that they are using these APIs, which is something that's required under MIPS and under promoting interoperability. So we're going to see, I think, a lot of movement from the EHR side over the next 6 months. And I think the challenge there is, okay, as an EHR, how do I know or understand the way in which the data is going to be exchanged, the way in which that I'm going to communicate with these other entities that are going to be out there? So they're going to having to understand, okay, what are these other players in the market going to be doing, and how do I ensure I build these APIs in a way that's going to support as broadly as possible the mechanisms for all the different systems out there that may want to tap into those EHR APIs.
Yeah. And it's important to emphasize as well that, we're talking, as Sarah said directly, about a very complicated bidirectional exchange of data, right? Multiple exchanges of data.
Yes.
Very nuanced, right? These implementation guides are very nuanced, very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And these are going to be implemented in the wild by, how many different private companies,
Mm-hmm.
each of which are attempting to interpret these standards as best they can.
Yes.
But we don't expect there to be complete uniformity across implementations, right? That's never been how we see implementation of a specification play out. Just look at HL7 V2.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that we are going to have to be continuously monitoring as electronic health records kind of follow Epic's lead and start to release their own versions of these implementation guides. And as these payers start to conform to some of the required APIs beginning 2027.
Now, this is where, though, it really helps to have a level of collaboration and coordination within the industry. So Sam, you mentioned Da Vinci and this Da Vinci implementation guide. So having that FIRE accelerator group, which is bringing together organizations from the payer world and the provider world and the EHR world to try and figure out these standard implementations and how to do this stuff effectively. That helps us. It's not perfect. It's not going to be 100%. Not every, payer is involved with Da Vinci or able to, conform to those different requirements right now, or maybe it's not interested in doing so while it's technically optional. So that's where, there's going to be variation in the market. There's going to be challenges.